How do you make holy water? You boil the hell out of it. It's a pretty good joke. What type of car did Jesus drive? Chrysler. That's a pretty good joke. Okay, we're going to spend the next maybe 30 minutes watching some Dave Chappelle. So let's do that. All right, hi, I'm Carl. Like Dan said, I came to Muncie, Indiana in 1999. I came here to party and to tell jokes. And my freshman year, I encountered a couple of folks on my dorm floor. They invited me out to church, and I reluctantly went after a couple of months of them kind of like incessantly inviting me. Now, being funny was like always a really big deal in my life. I don't know when it, I think it was sometime in junior high, I think I learned that I could get attention, I could get friends by being funny. In high school, we meaning my friends and I, we probably made 50 to 75 movies, all on VHS tape. All would end me if they ever got out on the internet right now. But I was born in the sweet spot of technology, which was I am young enough to know how to use it, but not old enough. Let's see, I'm old enough, no, I'm young enough to know how to use it, yes, but not so young that it ruined my life and my things were on YouTube. Man, that wasn't a very good explanation of that. But being funny was really important to me, so it's what I want to do for a career. When I was presented with the gospel on December 8th, 1999, my freshman year, they said, Carl, what would compel you to follow Jesus? And what would stop you? And the first thing I said with them, what would stop me, is I'm afraid that if I become a Christian, I won't be funny anymore. And then they proceeded to tell me about Christian comedians, which just made it worse. It didn't help. I thought, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Y'all talking about Christian comedians. I've never heard of these people before, and I'm sure they're not very funny. But that night, that wasn't enough. They asked what would compel me, and I said, I think it's true. I think Jesus is the way to God. I think I need him. I think I have sin in my life. I think I need forgiveness. And so that night, December 8th, 1999, I decided to begin to follow Jesus. And then I went on staff at the church that I got involved in. I went on staff at that church in 2003, and I did ministry stuff for a long time. And I continue to do that. I've been doing that for 20 years. But about 10 years ago, I was in counseling, and I was about to go on sabbatical. And you take kind of a 6 months, 4 months break from ministry full time. And my counselor was like, you should do something creative. You should do something fun. And she gave me some ideas, and I didn't like any of them. And I said, well, I thought about doing stand-up before. That's like what I wanted to do when I came to college. Maybe I will try that. And so I dabbled in that a little bit. Let's see here. That's my family. My wife's in there. That's just my favorite picture to show of my family. So that picture's a little old, it's a little dated, but we took it. There was a pop-up zoo in the parking lot of a used furniture store in Muncie, Indiana. Like only can happen in Muncie. And we went there because it was like $1 to see the white tiger or something, and you felt so sad seeing it, but you kind of had to see it too because it's just $1. And I went with my wife and my kids, and then the next day my wife was gone, and it was still going on, and my wife's birthday was coming up. I said, what if we go back and we pay $20? Because you pay $20, they'll take your picture, and you get your picture taken with the baby lion or baby kangaroo or a little monkey. And so we chose the baby lion. I put makeup on my daughter. I put my glasses on my son. I matched them. I put a scarf on. I got a trophy because it just felt like I needed a trophy. And we showed up and got that picture taken. So, that's it. I mean... Maybe the best $20 you ever spent. It is the best $20, absolutely, that I've ever spent. And what I love about it is we had one shot, right? It was like taking it, and then the lady was like, none of y'all kids are smiling. And then I looked at it and I said, no, that's it. That's what we want. They did exactly what I coached them to do. So. Okay, so I did stand up for a little bit. I was okay at it. I was moderate at it. Here's some photos from this was back here in Muncie. I used to perform at Be Here Now. Man, look at that beard. Look at that beard. So every time I see that picture, I think that's what I should look like right now. It was a good beard. This was a big moment for me. I would headline this podunk, well, this one I'm hosting. I would do this kind of podunk bar in Eaton, Indiana, called the Green Diamond Junction. So I would do that maybe once a month. I guess I'm hosting that night. This was a big night for me. I'm performing in front of about 75-year-olds at I don't know if that's at a VA or where that's at. I got recruited to do that. It was a paying gig. I think that might have been my first paying gig where I was like, I'm a professional now. And let me just tell you, 70-year-olds are a wonderful audience. They're a great audience, so that was good, I think. And then this maybe was the biggest moment, I don't know about my life. I do have 3 kids. Anyone know that person on the right is? It absolutely is Hacksaw Jim Duggan. So you probably don't know who Hacksaw Jim Duggan is. Who knows who Hacksaw Jim Duggan is? Okay, a couple people. He's a wrestler from the 80s. I mean, this guy wrestled with Hulk Hogan in Madison Square Garden. So he was a big deal. I watched him on like cartoons when I was a kid. And he'd have 2x4 and he'd always go, ho! Like that was his sum up. And I got recruited. I got paid to do this gig too. It was at the Chug, which is the dirtiest bar in Muncie. If you haven't been, you want to go to the dirtiest bar in Muncie. And it was for about 25 people, and Hacksaw did his comedy thing for about 50 minutes, and it was amazing. It was actually really good. So, okay, so that's a little bit of. Now I've done a little bit of theater with this man right here, Nathan Hart. He's been my director for some shows. This is the most recent show I was in School of Rock, which is a pretty good photo. So I learned about 10 years ago that it was really important to have some type of performance in my life, right? And so that's kind of for the last 10 years, whether it's been theater or different acting things or stand-up comedy. I haven't gone through the crisis to have an improv troupe yet, but that's, I'm sure, on its way. Let me ask you guys this. What do you think's funny? Who do you think's funny? Who? What? Yeah, what makes you laugh? Who makes you laugh? Mr. Bean makes you laugh. Okay. Okay, great.
That picture of you and your kids did it for me.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Bean, what else makes you laugh? Well, let me just ask you first, why does Mr. Bean make you laugh?
Physical comedy.
Okay.
I have big sense of humor like a second grade boy.
Okay.
Physical comedy.
Yeah. Do you like watching people fall?
I have laughed at my children before when they fell and then had to stop and ask if they were okay.
Okay. How do you sleep at night?
Fine.
Okay, good. Good. Okay. I love people falling. I love watching people fall, too.
Chevy Chase, man.
Chevy Chase?
Master of falls.
Yeah, he was.
Saturday Night Live.
He's really good. Skylar, what do you think's funny?
I don't know why, but I think watching people puke is hilarious.
Ooh, okay. Oh, man, but you're kind of right. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. We used to, that reminds me, when I was a student, we would do this thing with like 5 or 6 guys, and we do something called the milk challenge. You guys ever participate in that? Where you try to drink a gallon of milk in an hour, and you just automatically throw up. And I remember recording it, and it was really funny. You're right. I kind of judged you when you said that, but it is pretty funny. What else? What do you guys find funny?
I watch a lot of dry bar stand-up comedy.
Okay.
Comedians.
Okay. Okay, great. Any particular comedian? It's okay.
The name is not coming to mind,
Yeah, no, that's
but I
fine.
do watch a lot of stand-up
Yeah, yeah.
in general.
When I did stand-up, people would ask me, who's my favorite comedian? I felt like I could name like 2. So it wasn't like I had this, big Rolodex of comedians that I would name. Okay? Anybody else? What do you guys find funny? Sinbad. 1988 called, man. They want their comedian back. Okay, Sinbad. I still remember a Sinbad stand-up thing that I saw as a kid. Okay. Sinbad had a bit about ordering at McDonald's and how people were looking at the menu back and forth and how it's the same on both sides. I still remember that. It's 30 years ago.
Reformed at the basketball arena here.
Okay.
He was like the first major show when that thing opened.
When Worthen opened. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
I like awkward stuff.
Okay.
So like Wes Anderson style.
Yeah, yeah.
Like stuff that kind of makes you cringe a little bit, but also just
Yeah.
like, what's going on?
Yeah, yeah.
So much funny stuff.
Doesn't matter what they do.
Muppets.
Jim Henson's.
Man, I could have given 100 answers. I didn't think someone was going to say Muppets tonight. That's great. That's awesome.
I like watching the dry bar comedy.
Okay.
Those guys on there are usually pretty good.
Okay. What is dry bar comedy? You mentioned that too.
They're basically, it's from Utah.
Okay.
The Mormons, so they have.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's basically all the usual comedy, but they take out the strings.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Mormons can be funny. All right. Who knew? Who knew?
I think they import the comedy.
Okay. Yeah. That's right. Okay.
Actually, what's his name? Pedro. Vote for Pedro. What was that?
Oh yeah, the people who made Napoleon Dynamite. They're a Mormon couple.
Yeah, that's a Mormon company.
Yeah. You're right.
Good snippets too. I love watching.
Yeah. Okay. This guy came to Ball State last year. I think he's funny. We're gonna watch a little bit of him. If you thought that was funny, or people were laughing at that, why were people laughing? Like, what made that funny? Yeah.
It appeals to me because it's just a dry delivery.
Okay, so the way he delivered, yeah, okay.
Self-deprecation.
Yep, for sure, right? That is really common amongst comedians. When I started doing stand-up, I was given 3 pieces of advice. One was don't wear shorts. Apparently you're not supposed to wear shorts. 2 was always take the mic stand if you're not going to use it and put it behind you before you start your set. So that's something you want to do. And the 3rd thing was make fun of yourself. And the nice thing about making fun of yourself, right, you're not going to copy somebody else's material typically. It often endears you to the audience. It makes you relatable. And I thought that was good advice as well. And that's how, if you notice, a lot of comedians, both amateur and professionals, start their set that way. I had, and this wasn't the best jokes that I had, but I had a mediocre bit about how being named Carl wasn't a very good name. Carl's never the guy in the movie who gets a girl. Carl's the guy in the movie who gets a restraining order from the girl. Have you ever seen a lead in a movie that was named Carl and he was good looking? It's like never, right? Best case scenario, Carl is named after a dog. I told you, it's like mediocre, right? But again, there was something good about being able to make fun of myself. Now this may be uncomfortable for some of you, it may not, but this guy does a pretty good job making fun of himself, self-deprecating humor. I had the opportunity to host a show that he was on. He's an Indianapolis comedian that performed in Indianapolis around the time I did stand up, and then I saw him on America's Got Talent, and he made it to like the finals on that. Okay, so it's kind of fun. I got to perform with that guy a couple years ago, and he killed. He was the headliner the night I was doing it, and then again, it was fun to see him on that. Fun to see him again. I think he made it 2nd or 3rd for that season or whatever. What'd you guys think of that? Any thoughts? Liked it? Didn't like it? Uncomfortable? Kind of uncomfortable?
It was funny.
It's funny. Okay. Yeah.
I forgot what the 8-year-old girl said.
Yeah. Yeah, you're waiting for that. Okay. Yeah. So so you're kind of critiquing him. Okay, that's fine. No. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, there is something about our ability to make fun of ourselves and laugh at ourselves that actually can be really freeing. And I'm going to get back to that. So I'm going to talk about a lot of things here in the middle, but I'm going to kind of get back to this main idea here towards the end. About 2 years ago, I defended my thesis for grad school. Now, I started grad school when I was 25, 26, 24, I don't remember, but I finished when I was 40. So it took me a while. It took a class or 2 at a time. I was taking classes when Dan was here. Dan moved away for like a decade, and he came back, and I was still taking classes. But I had to do a thesis at the end of grad school, and I'm not much of a writer. I'm not a very good writer, and it was really intimidating for me to think, how am I going to write 100 pages that are academic on something? And so it was God and humor. I thought, what would I like to study to that extent? And so that's what I wrote my thesis on. It was painful. It was painful because I couldn't really make it funny, right? Like, that wasn't the point. It needed to be really academic. I tried to make it funny in the introduction, and then my advisor read it and said, you need to cut your entire introduction. This isn't a magazine article. I was like, shoot, this thing is going to,
Are you going to read that intro for us?
No, maybe at the end. At the very end, I'll tell you how it started, and then you can judge me. I'll lose you if I tell you how it started right now. But again, I'm still not a very good writer. And so right before the thesis was done, I've done a bunch of different drafts. I've been working on this thing for almost a year. This is what my advisor had to say to me in an email. He said, the way in which you synthesize research is still rather choppy. This is the single greatest weakness of the thesis. Stylistically, it's rather rough. I seem to remember you saying that writing is not your forte or forte. If that's the case, then I'd say just leave it as is and press forward into graduation. And that's exactly what I did, baby. I got my degree.
Words of encouragement.
Yeah, that's right. See what I did there? A little bit of self-deprecation, right? So, but the way I had to structure my thesis, and so some of the things I'm going to be doing here this evening is based on my thesis. I'm not going to go through it. There's, dozens and dozens of pages that I'm not going to touch on, because the way it was set up is this thesis had to have an introduction, and it needed to focus on a topic that was going to touch on church history, it's going to touch on systematic theology, and it's going to touch on biblical theology. It's going to have a practical section, literary review, some of that. And so I had to kind of pick a section of church history to focus on and humor. And I just wanted to look at just a broad stroke, like how has the church viewed humor and comedy and laughter for 2,000 years? And they told me not to do that. And so I just focused on the works of C.S. Lewis. And again, I'm not going to talk a ton about Lewis tonight, but that was kind of the idea of looking at his works and then looking at theology and humor and biblical studies and humor as well. Doing my thesis, it was pretty interesting. I got to look at humor theory. There apparently are about 80 different theories on humor, on like why we laugh. But there are 3 major theories, and I hadn't heard them prior to doing this research. And I would imagine they're probably new to you folks here tonight. Right here, the superiority theory, relief theory, and congruity theory. Let me just quote E.B. White here, because I think this is really important. He says, humor can be dissected as a frog can, but the thing dies in the process, and the innards are discouraging to any but the purely scientific mind. This is kind of true, right? As we talk about humor a little bit more academically here for a little bit, and we look at it in the Bible, and we look at it in theology, we're probably not going to laugh a lot, because you're dissecting it. And in doing that, you don't laugh out loud often when you're dissecting things like that. But we got the superiority theory, and that's connected more to the emotions. And this theory would say that laughter is an expression of a person's feeling of superiority over other people. So you laugh in order to feel better than someone, or you laugh at someone in order to kind of put them down a ladder rung. Laughter can be a form of mockery in this theory. It's the first and oldest theory of laughter, with its its roots back to Plato. Terry Linfold describes it this way. He says, laughter is used by the witty to gain a superior vantage point from which to deride and degrade others, either to keep them inferior or to attempt to rock them from their high positions. It's easy to see how this kind of idea of laughter can take a darker turn. We see this in kids. We see this in adults too, right? When we're insecure, you mock someone, you make fun of someone to make yourself feel better. I would have this spiel that I would give. Anyone know what this is? The Naked Lady, Forrest Idol. And I was a tour guide at Ball State, and I did this, probably hundreds of times. I would take tours to the Naked Lady, and I would say, hey, this is a Naked Lady. People leave notes here, and sometimes when I'm feeling really lonely, I'll come to the Naked Lady, and I'll read people's notes, and then I'll rip them up. Because if I make other people feel bad, I feel better about myself. All right, let's go on. And that's how I do my tour. Like just that deadpan. Sometimes they would laugh, sometimes they wouldn't. I didn't care. I thought it was funny every time. That's a superiority theory of humor right there. We see this in the Bible. Psalm 2:4 says, he who sits in the heavens laughs, the Lord holds them in derision. There are 3 points. Three? I think I did that. There are 3 points in the Bible where God laughs, and it's actually all like this. It's all this idea of superiority theory, laughter of superiority, God laughing at his enemies. And so there's some truth to this theory. Second theory is the relief theory. So to go back here, and this is physical. So superiority theory is emotional. This theory, relief theory, is more physical. Laughter is a way for us to get rid of nervous energy. So think Sigmund Freud. We use jokes to cope with suppressed thoughts and feelings. Think of nervous laughter and tense moments. This is the laughter of Sarah in Genesis when she's told she's going to have a child at such an old age. Have you ever been at a funeral and start to laugh? Or am I the only terrible person here? I was at a funeral years ago, and I started to laugh. And it was a funeral where it was like, not all funerals are the same level of sadness, but it was a sad funeral. It was my friend who I'd known for a long time. His father fell in the shower, and he died suddenly, right? He's in his 70s. And so it wasn't, it's somber, and there were hundreds of people there. And then there was a special song. And it wasn't this woman, but it was this woman's son. Hope you guys know Sandy Patty. She's a contemporary Christian singer of the 1980s. Well, her son came out and did a special song, and it was, some people probably loved it. I just couldn't believe it was happening. And my friend, Craig, I'm just going to call him out next to me. Craig is a counselor. He should know better. And he was sitting next to me, and I go to whisper something in his ear. I don't even know what I was going to say. But just the very action of doing this made him turn over in laughter, right? And then I turned over in laughter. And then for probably what felt like forever, I could have been 2 minutes, could have been 10 minutes, I was doing this. And people didn't know if I was weeping or laughing. I thought, if my friend sees me, I think our friendship is over, right? This feels so terrible. But that's the relief theory, right? This was this tense thing. And this, you had these kind of repressed feelings, and it comes out, and sometimes it comes up in laughter in the moments you don't want it to. So we've probably seen that. We've experienced that before. And then you've got the incongruity theory. An incongruity is when something is not in harmony or doesn't fit. When two things appear to disagree, when there's like a surprise there. I think the incongruity theory, and I argued in my thesis, said that this explains a lot of laughter, right? Maybe most laughter, right? Again, you can see some in the superiority, you can see some in the relief, but incongruity, particularly that in theology and in the Bible, that's where we find most of it right there. Again, incongruity theory asserts that laughter is a reaction to something that violates a person's normal mental pattern or normal expectations, right? Humor is all about the setup. So you think it's going in one direction and then it goes in the other, and that's what makes us laugh. And this is mental, right? So if superiority theory is emotional, relief is physical, incongruity is one that uses our minds. Again, punchlines are funny because you don't expect them. Stories are funny because you find yourself in unexpected circumstances and situations. I don't know how well this video does this theory. It does it a little bit, but it's pretty good. And we're going to watch it twice, because I think you got to watch it twice to get it. And it's, it's an incongruity theory, right? You expect, you're like, what's going on? And then it surprises you. It catches you off guard, right? It's playing on Joseph and Mary, and Joseph making Mary a pie. Oh, no, I can't go to that yet. Actually, I will go to that. Yeah, I'll go right there. Okay. I didn't set this up really well. This describes the incongruity theory as well. So I went to college. No, I think I was first on staff. I was either shared a dorm room with this, dorm floor with this guy, or I was first on staff. I don't remember, but we called him Woodchop. I think I gave him that name, or my friend Neil did. And he looked like this when he was at Ball State. And for the last 20 years, when he goes and gets a state ID or driver's license, he dresses up differently. And I don't know about you, no one's really laughed. This is one of the funniest things I've ever seen. When I saw it, and you know why? It's funny because you don't expect someone to shave off their eyebrows and their hair. I mean, that's like commitment. He said sometimes he'd have to go in multiple times, and he'd have to play the character in there. Like, this is how I normally look, so this is how my state ID looks. Anyone know what this is right here? Nathan, I feel like you would know what this makeup is. It's a juggalo. People are really in insane clown posse wear this type of makeup. It's really good. So that's incongruity theory. You're not expecting, if you see someone's ID like that, right, you're not expecting it to look that way. Okay. All right, so those are the theories, right, of humor that we're going to look at: superiority, relief, incongruity. Let's look at the church historically a little bit, and how they've viewed laughter. Again, people typically don't think of the church as places for laughter. Again, I had reservations. The 4th century Archbishop of Constantinople said this: This world is not a theater in which we can laugh, and we are not assembled together in order to burst into peals of laughter, but to weep for our sins. It is not God who gives us the chance to play, but the devil. John Wesley said this, "He that plays when he is a child will play when he is a man." Again, Richard Baxter is a great Puritan legend. He's penned many awesome things. He never wrote a single joke in any of his hundreds and hundreds of sermons. Sheila Klopfer observes this. She says, taking into consideration the long history of theology as an academic discipline, the wealth of material on humor and religion is infinitesimal by comparison. The cumulative result has been a one-sided emphasis on the serious at the expense of humor, laughter, joy, and play. Taboos have been erected around the sacred, which involve the repudiation of comedy and humor. They belong to the lower end of the hierarchy of emotions and are not suitable for times of worship or the gravity of Christian devotion. In the process, the melancholic personality becomes the determinant for measuring the quality of Christian sanctity. And so then, again, there's some good examples too. Again, C.S. Lewis, he loved to laugh. G.K. Chesterton, I'll quote later, he wrote a ton on laughter. So it's not everybody, but in general, again, there's been a lot of lack of information on humor and theology in the Bible, or a negative view on that. A couple questions we're going to answer is, where do we find humor in the Bible? Where do we find humor in theology? And how can having a good sense of humor help us as followers of Jesus? And that last one I'm probably more interested in, but we're going to kind of jump through a couple of examples through those first two. So first, where do we find humor in the Bible? I like what Doris Donnelly says. She says this, years of conditioning have rendered the scriptures as predictable and innocuous stories in which serious people speak in a language filled with moralisms and legalisms, lacking fun and surprise. The dangerous consequence of reading the Bible this way is that the Creator God, and by extension Jesus Christ, becomes humorless, being incapable of enjoying a joke, and so do we as his disciples. So again, we've been trained not to look at the scriptures to find humor in there, and yet it's in there a lot. There's a ton of elements of humor, right? There's irony, there's incongruity, there's misdirection, there's satire, there's hyperbole. All attributes of humor, and they're throughout the entire Bible. Some examples of this. Again, one of the most famous probably spaces when we think of like laughter and humor is Sarah and Isaac, and his name means laughter, right? Frederick Buechner, I really like kind of the picture he paints about this scene. He says this, the place to start is with a woman laughing. She's an old woman, and after a lifetime in the desert, her face is cracked and rutted like a 6-month drought. She hunched her shoulders around her eyes and starts to shake. She squinties her eyes shut, and her laughter is all wheeze and tears running down as she rocks back and forth in her kitchen chair. She's laughing because she is pushing 91 hard and has just been told she's going to have a baby. The old woman's name is Sarah, of course, and her old man's name is Abraham, and they are laughing at the idea of a baby being born in the geriatric ward and Medicare picking up the tab. Maybe the most interesting part of it all is that far from getting angry at them for laughing, God told them that when the baby was born, he wanted them to name him Isaac, which in Hebrew means laughter. So you can say that God not only tolerated their laughter, but blessed it, and in a sense joined in it himself. I think it's a beautiful picture that he paints of God and laughter in that moment. And then we've got a ton of stories that, they're kind of funny, right? Isaac's birth, I just mentioned that. We've got Ehud in Judges. You guys know that story? I remember the first time I read that story in college, I was like, really? This is in the Bible? It's a story in Judges where there's this kind of heavier set guy, and he's the king of an invading nation in Judges, and then Ehud, the judge, is raised up, and he's a left-handed person, and he takes this knife and stabs him in the belly, and the knife goes so deep it gets caught kind of among the flaps in the belly, and then he's in the bathroom for a while, and people think he's relieving himself, and it's, it's like, it's kind of dark. But it's kind of funny, too, right? Like, it feels ridiculous, right? Aaron's response to Moses, when Moses comes from the mountain, he says to them, let any who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf, right? That's what Aaron says to Moses. That's ridiculous, right? That's a ridiculous response. It's like something a child would say. The Jonah story, right? There's tons of irony right in there. Jonah's running from God, right? And he runs in the opposite direction. He's taken by a fish, taken to Nineveh. Story of Esther. Proverbs. It's just filled with it, right? Like Proverbs are filled with these little pithy sayings that are jokes, right? And what are the jokes in Proverbs a lot about? They're about marriage. They're about money. They're about relationships. They're about the things that comedians make their living off of. A lot more examples that I could give. But let's move on to Jesus. Jesus and humor. What's the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. It's great. Unfortunately for my thesis, there was no Jesus laughed. So I had to kind of argue for that, argue out of silence a little bit. I had to bring the Trinity into play where I was kind of arguing for it, right? I'm not going to do that right now, but, there's no Jesus laughed, right? It could be argued that Jesus' humor below could be categorized under the incongruity theory of humor. Jesus takes what people expect and he flips them upside down, even though there's not a verse that Jesus told a joke. Also, the people who hung out with Jesus would tend to make you think Jesus had a good time, right? Jesus was accused of being a drunk, right? And he didn't drink, but he hung out with people who got drunk, right? And again, what do people do when they're hanging out and they're drinking? Well, they're laughing, usually, right? It's usually a good time. Jesus used hyperbole all the time, every time. See what I did there? And that was improv, baby. That wasn't in my notes. Jerry Gill gives a good summary of this, of Jesus. He says, Jesus frequently uses puns, answers questions with questions of his own, and engages in offbeat, seemingly irrelevant nonverbal behavior. Most importantly, both the context and the content of his remarks are such as to demand being read with raised eyebrows, dancing eyes, and some sort of a smile. If not so read, they would almost certainly come across as crude, evasive, and even offensive, both to the hearer and to the reader. And it's hard, too, because, Scripture doesn't say, like, Jesus said that with a wink. You're right. Jesus raised his eyebrow and said that. Jesus said that with anger on his face, right? We don't get any of that. We just get what he said, and then we kind of have to interpret based on the context and the conversation and what's going on and who he's talking to on kind of what type of even tone that he's using. No passage kind of makes this kind of idea of Jesus using humor more necessary than the interaction he has with the Canaanite woman, found in Matthew 15. If you know that story, Jesus is in Gentile territory. He's approached by a Canaanite woman who desperately desires for her daughter to be healed. Jesus' initial response is that of silence, causing the disciples to ask Jesus, do you want us just to get rid of her, to make her leave? Jesus eventually engages her in conversation, and this is how Matthew records the dialogue. Jesus says, he answered, "Send only the lost sheep of Israel." The woman came and knelt before him. "Lord, help me," she said, and he replied, "It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Then Jesus said to her, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed at that moment. Now again, this woman calls Jesus Lord 3 times to kind of show this idea of respect. This woman could have, and maybe she did, but she could have pursued other avenues for healing. There was a temple dedicated to a god of healing that was located just a few miles northwest in Sidon. This woman was likely familiar with the pagan deity, but Jesus' reputation preceded him, and she comes and said to Jesus for healing of her daughter. And when Jesus finally answers her, his words are pretty dismissive, and they can move quickly towards insulting. I mean, the part about the dog, right? That's what makes us a little uncomfortable, right? Like, did Jesus just really call her a dog? And then you're like, well, maybe 2,000 years ago, calling a woman dog was like, okay. Nope, it's not. Did a little research. It's maybe worse. Dogs, they were like scavengers back then. We have a much more friendly relationship with dogs today than they did 2,000 years ago. Turns out it's just bad to call a woman dog like all the time. Yep. Elton Trueblood, he goes at length kind of talking about this story, and he's got this book called The Humor of Christ. And again, he mines every potential funny thing that Jesus could have said in that book. But he says this about the difficulty of the language. He says, if there's a harder problem than this in the New Testament interpretation, we do not know what it is. Taken at its face value, the sentence is rude and contemptuous. Above all, it is a complete variance with the general picture of Christ, which we receive from the rest of the gospel, particularly in connection with the poor and needy. How can we square this with his acceptance of harlots and tax gatherers and his faith in poor fishermen? So one way that we can make sense of this passage is we can look at it through the lens of humor. That there was some type of playful banter going on, maybe similar, maybe not similar, but similar to the woman at the well in John 4. You could interpret that in that passage as well. Canaanite woman doesn't flinch at the insult. She concedes she might be a dog, but argues that even dogs need to eat. This causes Trueblood to conclude that Jesus was indulging in this kind of banter about racial and national differences as the only logical alternative to the insufferable hypothesis that he was being intentionally chauvinistic and rude. Now, I don't know if I would go as far as Trueblood. I would say, well, there are other interpretations that we could find in this passage. Some have held that this interaction of Jesus is reinforcing the fact that he came for Jews first and then for the Gentiles, or that Jesus didn't owe this woman anything and her humility and persistence were to be commended. And the reason he compliments her on her great faith, some even think this was some kind of test for this woman that she passed with flying colors. And those are all, I think, those can be interpretations that can be valid as well. But I like this interpretation. I like it better. It sits better with me, and I think I can kind of see it. I can read it. I can hear it in there as well. A clue to the interpretation can be found in Jesus' positive tone at the end of the conversation when he commends her for her great faith. Trueblood observes that the clue to Christ's spirit in the entire encounter is his immediate affirmative and friendly response to the woman's wit. If Christ could respond so readily to the banter of another, there's reason to suppose that there was an element of banter in his own earlier and apparently insulting statement. Again, that's one example. There's a lot of examples that we can look in Jesus, the way he used humor, hyperbole, the way he talked to people, the way he used plays on words. Again, I don't have time to do that, but there's a lot of other examples we could look at. But we're going to move on to humor and theology. Karl Barth, Barth? I always want to say Barth, like barf. Karl Barth only dedicated one page to humor in his 12 volumes of church dogmatics. But he had one. That's kind of cool. But if we're looking at theology and we're looking at God has perfect personality, then it's reasonable to conclude that he has a perfect sense of humor. Jackson Lee Ice adds to this when he concludes, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, consider the possibilities for his unlimited sense of humor and his ability to enjoy laughter, to laugh, and to be amused. And so we see this idea of incongruity, right, in Christian theology. Again, this isn't like laugh out loud, but these are the elements of what humor is made up of. The incarnation. God taking on human flesh, the virgin birth, right? That's, we were laughing at that just a second ago, right, in that video we watched. Taking up a cross and dying to find life. Tension between present suffering and future hope. Being made like God, but being made from the dust of the earth. Let's talk about that for a second. Aristotle said, of all living creatures, only man is endowed with laughter, because only human beings are made in the image of God. Your dog has never laughed. Sometimes my kids will be like, oh, look at that dog. Dog thought that was funny. It's like, no, dogs don't laugh. Wilson is always terrorizing my youngest. He's 9. He's always terrorizing my dog. And the other day, this is a little while back, he had the leaf blower. And he opened up the door knowing the dog was right there. And he opened it up and bam, got her right in the face with the leaf blower. We all laughed. Lucy didn't. She was just scared. So there's something about human beings that we've only been given this idea of laughter. And again, we're made in the image of God. We have a unique relationship to humor. Man is the only, and this is Jackson Lee Ice, he says, man is the only animal that weeps and laughs and knows that he weeps and laughs and wonders why. He is the most humor-seeking, humor-making, and humor-giving species that has walked the earth, ever ready to provoke or be provoked with laughter, even in the midst of fear and pain. He is capable of incongruous ameliorating his misery by a smile, pun, or joke. If a culture exists without humor, we haven't found one yet. And our bodies are pretty funny, right? Nate Bargatze, right, in the stuff that we watch, he was kind of laughing at his body in the Under Armour bit. He was laughing at how slow he was. C.S. Lewis says the fact that we have bodies is the oldest joke that there is. And the world's oldest joke is a Sumerian joke. They found it, and it's about 3,000 years old, and it's about flatulence. It's a joke. I don't know if they got the punchline, but the shtick is about a wife farting on her husband's lap. It's 3,000 years old. Things just don't, nothing changes. Sounds come out of there. It's funny. Again, humor is all about the I didn't see that coming moment. And Easter is the ultimate I didn't see that coming moment, right? And so again, I could go on and on. There's tons of other examples we could go into. But again, there's tons of humor in theology. Even if it's not laugh out loud humor, we see kind of this idea of humor and incongruity in there. Okay, lastly. How can having a good sense of humor help us as followers of Jesus or just as human beings? So I'm just going to say as human beings right here because I think it really does help. My main point is this. Our ability to laugh at ourselves can help us walk humbly with God. Or our ability to laugh at ourselves can just help us walk humbly as humans. We're encouraged as Christians to walk in humility, and Jesus was the ultimate example of that. And so much of laughter is not taking ourselves too seriously. Ryan Niemiller, who we looked at, who did the stuff on America's Got Talent. I mean, again, that was him taking a disability, and again, I'm sure that's really difficult for him, right, just on an everyday basis, but finding the humor in that, inviting us into that, realizing we have so many faults that we are finite, we're limited in knowledge, experience, and wisdom, and so we can laugh when we realize there is a God and we are not him. Kids don't get the capacity to laugh, at least in my research, till they're like 5 or 6. Like they don't really understand jokes, and it coincides with their ability to laugh at themselves. Let me tell you this story. This was years ago. I was first on staff with the church. I was 22, and I was in a summer program where our college students participate in. So they're all working at the YMCA of the Rockies. About 150 college students from different universities, and they're working out there. We have something at the end of this leadership program called closing ceremonies that had about 200 people at it. People who work for the Y, families, kids, all the LTers that are there. And I was a coach of one of these small groups that were there. And our small group that summer had a reputation that we were out of control and ridiculous and fun. And so it's like, okay, we have to make a video for this closing ceremony. Ours has to be the best. So we go to make it, and we realize we're out of time. Everyone's at work except for me and Chip. So Chip and I just got to make the video that represents our group. And Chip was a little out there. He's like an emo kid. And so we're like, what are we going to do? I'm going to tell you about the video we made. So the opening scene was black and white, and I was driving, and I was smoking a Virginia Slim cigarette because they're the longest. And so I'm smoking. And then it's Chip, and he's smoking. And then it's me, and we're smoking. That's it. That's the first 60 seconds of the video. It's just us smoking so hard. Okay? And this Red Hot Chili Peppers song, Slide, is playing. So it's kind of the sad, sad song. Okay? And again, it's just him and me because one of us is filming, right? Like one person has to be on camera, right? We can't be on camera together. So we're driving, and then we're going to some spot. And then we get to the top of this kind of mountain area that's overlooking the Continental Divide. We set up the camera on a car, and then we're both outside a frame on the left and the right. And then this other song hits. I don't know if you guys remember this song, but I'll play it for you. So this is playing. It's militant. It's Kanye West, before Kanye was the Kanye we know today. And so this was big in 2004, right? So this is coming. And the chorus is going to hit, and we got to wait for it. You guys remember this song, anybody? It was so good. It was so good when it came out. Jesus Walks. Okay. So this is coming in. It's, it's building. Okay, so Jesus Walks is playing, and we're walking into frame now. Okay? Coming in here. And we were looking at the camera. So Jesus Walk's still playing. We take off our shirts, okay? Now we're shirtless. Then we pull out this huge knife that I have. Huge knife from the kitchen. And I learned, as my TCOM degree, that if you put chocolate syrup on the back of a knife in black and white, it looks most like real blood. So I start carving things into my chest while this is going on. Kind of this like anarchy symbol that was a symbol of our group. Okay? Then we take the knife and we have this little altar set up. And we take it and we stab it right into this kind of little, it was almost like a Muppet. It wasn't quite a Muppet, but it was like a Muppet. We stab it. And then it cuts out. Stab this thing. Jesus Walks is done. Fades to black. Now remember, Chip and I were the only ones who weren't working. Me, I guess I was working. That was my job for the day. And we go find Trevor, and Trevor was like 6'6", and he probably weighed 110 pounds. Skinny man. And he was working at this, like a snack bar, and we're like, Trevor, man, we need you for one scene. We need you for one scene. So he comes out. We put chocolate sauce on his hands, and he comes out. He goes like this, because it fades after we stabbed it, and it fades to him, and it just looks like blood goes everywhere. He falls to his knees. And then the music now at this point is just single piano keys. Ding, ding. Well, he's just kind of doing this. And he looks like a zombie. Like, he had zombie-like features. And, and then it fades to black, and then it ends. We're the last video. Remember, I told you there's probably 250 people there. I'm the MC. Every video had applause, laughter. People were taking their children out of the room during this video. And I'm up there in front of everybody, humiliated. I mean, I knew as soon as it was playing, I was just like, what have I done? Because when I'm editing it in a room and the music's not in there and it's not in the big screen, and there was like people in their 30s that were watching this that were also on, they're like, oh, that's kind of funny, that's weird. But no one thought it was like terrible. But when we saw it, we're like, that was terrible. That was frightening. And because it was just so well done. It just looked so good, too. I was straight out of my TCOM degree at Ball State. So I was ready to make this art piece, right? And I remember, so that happened. I felt humiliated, but I had to kind of keep, all right, well, next up, but, it's like it's me. I'm up here. I think I said, I've made better decisions in my life. To crickets. I mean, there's no one like, ah! And I remember it was really hard for me. And, what I could have done, what I did, and this is so sad I did this, I deleted the video like the next day. Oh, wouldn't it be so fun if I could show it for you right now? Or at least show it in some context, right? But I deleted it because I just felt so humiliated, so embarrassed. I wasn't able to laugh at that for probably like 7 or 8 years, right? Now, there's the level of I needed to own okay, that whatever line there was, we took a couple steps past that for that avenue. I mean, it was like a ridiculous art piece, right? It was kind of making fun of that, whatever. But it was a little disturbing. But I could have, kind of owned that, confessed that, and then moved on, right? Humility. But again, me taking myself so seriously in that moment, look what I've done. Look what I've done to my reputation. Look what people think of me right now, right? My ego is on myself, right? And so, again, there is something about our ability to laugh at ourselves, even when we make mistakes, right? And again, not every mistake, not every moment, but that would have been a good place where I think I could have done that when I was younger. I showed up to a wedding. This is the nicest wedding I've ever been to 2 weeks ago. I look around, and I'm the only person without a suit on, only guy. And I go to my wife, I said, I'm the only person without a suit. She said, well, it's a formal wedding. It was her freaking family. I was like, you saw what I left, you saw what I drove to the wedding in. And again, you know what I was able to do? I was able to laugh. I wasn't worried the whole night about, oh gosh, what does everybody think of me? I kept saying I'm the DJ for the night because I look like the DJ walking around because I didn't have this, the suit on for that night. So again, there's something for us. And when we're unable to laugh at ourselves, again, sometimes there's things where, gosh, that just was mean. That's why I'm not able to laugh at that. But when we're unable to laugh at our faults and failures, usually it's because our ego is wounded. When we get angry, it's usually because our ego is wounded. And so again, it can expose that. Laughing at ourselves can lead to confession, which is an extremely important discipline for any Christian. Steve Wilkins puts it this way. He says, we can't even get to a point where we recognize the need to confess without one of humor's tools. Laughter has its roots in the incongruity between what is and what should be. And this ability is at the heart of moral and spiritual discernment. Again, it's healthy and freeing to take an honest look at our life and be able to laugh at this. This is Doris Donnelly. She said, some things happen when we face the truth about ourselves. For one thing, there is no room for pomposity, arrogance, or self-absorption. More than one person has pointed out how closely conjoined humility is with humor, which I think is connected to hummus, which means like dirt, right? Even we're created from the dirt. A sense of humor, like a true sense of humility, involves ruthless honesty about who we are without disguise or pretense. H. Allen Smith defines a humorist as a fellow who realizes first that he is no better than anybody else, and second, that nobody else is either. And so the thing, of course, that prevents us from laughing at ourselves is what Lewis called the greatest sin of pride. Again, it's our ego. I alluded to this, but Dallas Willard says, find a person who has embraced anger, and you will find a person with a wounded ego. I thought, yeah, that's really true for me. And the only laughter we typically hear from the proud is that of mockery, flippancy, right? Lewis said this, and I think it's interesting. He says, other vices may sometimes bring people together. You may find good fellowship and jokes and friendliness among drunken people or unchaste people, but pride always means enmity. It is enmity, and not only enmity between man and man, but enmity to God. Terry Linville goes on, he says, our faith makes a man laugh at something more at himself. We are all tempted to take ourselves too seriously. If taken in the right way, Christianity brings relief from this wearisome self-inflation. Someone who feels safe and sure in the hands of God and likes to see his neighbor have a good time will come down from his pedestal and enjoy the joke he is. A Christian is not afraid to have a little fun at his own expense. And I think that's the key, right? The more safe and secure, and we're all in process, right? We all have our own insecurities, but the more secure we feel, the more safe we feel, the easier we're actually going to be able to laugh at ourselves, and typically the better sense of humor we will have. I've been the MC for a lot of events. Surprisingly, they gave me the mic again in our network of churches. But we had a winter conference where I was the MC of. And I would introduce all the speakers, and I would just do the most outlandish, ridiculous things to introduce them. And usually there was a level of mockery, towards them, kind of making fun of them a little bit. It was kind of a roast before they came out. And there was one pastor who refused, this was maybe the second year I did it, refused to have me and my other friend introduce him. And at the time I was younger, I didn't push back, and I thought, that's weird. I almost felt like it was like I felt bad. Like, oh man, maybe I've taken it too far. Maybe there's something I need to kind of repent of. But in retrospect, because I know this pastor and I know some of the issues that happened in his life over the next 10 years, this was someone who was unable to laugh at himself. And it led to him leaving his church because of that. It was someone who took himself too seriously, was unable to receive input. And that should have been a warning sign, like, gosh, this guy can't, someone can't playfully introduce them for 30 seconds, 45 seconds at a college retreat, right? It tends to be kind of a fun space. Okay, maybe I want to end here. I'm going to read this by Flannery O'Connor. Only if we are secure in our beliefs can we see the comical side of the universe. When a person feels safe, they're able to laugh at themselves without condemnation. Chesterton says life is serious all the time, but living cannot be. You may have all the solemnity you wish in your neckties, but anything more important, such as sex, death, and religion, you must have mirth, or you will have madness. So again, that's a little bit of kind of my argument there, is that, again, we see humor in the scriptures, we see humor in theology. Humor hasn't always been looked at a great light in church history, but there is something, again, it's not just humility. I think it can lead to confession. Humor can help us in our faith. Humor can help us in community. Humor can give joy in our lives. There's a lot of other kind of benefits of humor. I think maybe its best attribute is it helps us walk humbly. It helps us not take ourselves too seriously, and when we do that, we just live more peaceful, free, enjoyable lives as human beings. So that's what I got. What questions do you guys have? Thoughts? Thanks. you.